Milan. It was a city where time seemed to flow slowly, and every step felt like an entire story. Ryan Gosling wasn't looking for anything special there. He wasn't a tourist, nor a celebrity to be chased, he simply wanted silence. Silence from the constant hum of Hollywood, from the sound of camera flashes, and from the expectations that come with fame. Milan, with its wrought iron balconies, faded building facades, and the scent of freshly brewed espresso, seemed to Ryan like the perfect place to pause time and rest. Here, no one approached him for selfies, and passers-by chatted about the news in cafes with ease and without pretense. Ryan savored every moment of this solitude. That day, he decided to go for a walk through the city's central streets. He knew he wasn't in a hurry and could enjoy the atmosphere at his own pace. His gaze moved easily across shop windows, sculptures in the squares, and the walls of buildings that held centuries of stories. He thought about how important these kinds of moments were when you don't have to think about tomorrow and can simply exist in the here and now. As he passed a small vintage furniture shop, Ryan noticed a man standing at a bus stop. The man was middle-aged, with a worn-out face and sun-bleached black hair. He looked modest, dressed in an old jacket and faded jeans. In his hands was a small wallet, which he opened several times, trying to find a few coins to pay for the ride. Ryan slowed down, feeling a strange pull toward the moment. The man didn't just look poor, he looked lost. His eyes shifted between the wallet and his surroundings, as if searching for something more than money. He stood there, unable to decide what to do. Maybe he doesn't want to ask for help? Ryan thought. But then he saw the man clutch his wallet and nervously glance at the approaching bus. It was clear he realized he wouldn't be able to pay for the ride, and that his journey might end there. Ryan walked up to him, unsure why he felt compelled to act, but choosing to follow the impulse anyway. "Excuse me, do you need some help?" Ryan asked with a gentle smile. The man looked up and held his gaze on Ryan, as if not believing someone had actually noticed him. He seemed a bit confused, and then answered, unsure of what to say. "I don't know, I'm short a bit for the bus fare," he said quietly, his voice slightly shaky. I never ask for help." Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. He wasn't expecting anything special. He wasn't trying to be a hero or thinking his actions might change someone's life. He just wanted to help. "Here," Ryan said. "This should cover the ride. Don't worry about it." The man looked at the money, then at Ryan, his eyes filling with a kind of stunned gratitude, almost disbelief. "But why are you helping me?" His voice grew firmer, as if he couldn't understand why a total stranger would choose to help. "I can't repay you." Ryan smiled, sensing there was something meaningful in the gesture. "You don't have to repay anything," he replied. "Life's unfair, and if I can help, I will. That's enough." Still a bit overwhelmed, the man took the money. He nodded, though he seemed unsure of what to say. They stood in silence for a few seconds, then the man looked at Ryan and said, "You have no idea how thankful I am. I don't know how I could ever return this." "You don't need to," Ryan answered without thinking. "Life will return it in its own way." The man looked at Ryan one last time, shook his head slightly, and thanked him. Then, with relief in his eyes, he walked toward the bus stop, and the bus finally arrived. Ryan watched him until he got on and disappeared from view. Ryan continued his walk through Milan, as if nothing had happened. He returned to his thoughts, strolling through the city streets, reflecting on how often people, himself included, walk past others' struggles. And in that small act of kindness, he realized there are moments when you can help, and it becomes meaningful not just for the other person, but for yourself as well. He didn't know that this moment at the bus stop, which seemed so fleeting, would end up affecting him far more than he could have imagined. A month later, when he had almost forgotten about it, his life would change in an unexpected way. A few days had passed. Milan continued to amaze Ryan with its atmosphere, unhurried yet full of life. Every morning began with a strong Italian coffee at one of the local cafes, and the evenings usually ended with a stroll through narrow streets, where the glow of antique lanterns gave the city a special, almost magical hue. Ryan was enjoying this new rhythm of life, where each day was a chance to simply exist, to savor each moment without worrying about the future. But despite the calm atmosphere, thoughts of that random encounter with the man at the bus stop often surfaced in his mind. Sometimes, walking past the old building, Ryan would involuntarily recall how he handed the money to the stranger. He didn't feel like a hero, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this small act had meant something more. As if he had simply taken a step, but that step had somehow changed something in his life. One morning, as Ryan was sitting at a cafe table finishing the last sip of his espresso, the waiter came up, just like always, with a small paper card. He placed it on the table in front of Ryan and said, "This is for you. Someone left you a letter." Ryan picked up the envelope and immediately noticed the unusual paper. It was slightly rough, like old parchment, and had a pleasant scent. He opened the envelope and began to read. The handwriting was neat, but with a slightly nervous touch. "Hello, Ryan. My name is Daniel. You may not remember me, but I'm the person you helped at the bus stop a month ago. I want to thank you for your kindness. Your gesture didn't go unnoticed, and I want you to know it changed my life. I can't explain how, but your help inspired me and gave me the strength to move forward. I used to work in a field I always dreamed of, the coffee business. I've just opened a small cafe in Milan, and knowing how important it is to have real allies, I'd like to offer you the chance to become my partner. This isn't just a cafe, Ryan. It's a place I built from scratch, pouring my soul and effort into it. And now, I want you to be a part of it. I would be truly happy if you came by and saw what I'm talking about. This is my gift to you. All I ask is that you give me a chance to show how much one act of kindness can change." Ryan set the letter down, his eyes lingering on the lines. He tried to process the words, to understand what lay behind them. The man he had helped had decided to change his life completely. This letter wasn't just a thank you note, it was a partnership proposal. Ryan pondered the idea that this unexpected gesture might be a sign. A sign that sometimes life takes a different turn than you expect. "What do you say?" he murmured to himself, glancing at the envelope and then back at the letter. This is crazy. It was hard for him to believe that a complete stranger would offer him something so significant. Ryan wasn't sure he needed a partnership or a cafe. He had never even considered going into business, but the idea that his gesture had impacted someone's life so deeply that they would take such a bold step, it struck him. It felt like more than just coincidence. A few days later, Ryan decided to meet with Daniel. He didn't know what to expect, but a vague sense of excitement lingered. He realized this wasn't just a new opportunity, it was something more. A chance to change not only his life, but possibly the lives of others. Daniel was waiting for him at the small cafe, which Ryan found without trouble. It was a cozy place with a low ceiling, wooden tables, and chairs that seemed to tell stories of their own. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, and paintings on the walls depicted scenes from everyday city life. When Ryan stepped inside, he saw Daniel immediately. The man was wearing the same old jacket Ryan had seen him in the first time. But now, his face was different. There was a clear sense of determination and confidence that Ryan noticed at once. "Ryan," Daniel said with a smile. "Welcome." Ryan reached out his hand, and they exchanged a short but warm handshake. He noticed how Daniel seemed to glow with joy. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said, inviting him to the table. "I thought you might say no. But I'm glad I have the chance to speak with you." "I'm glad too," Ryan replied, sitting across from him. "I didn't expect that letter to bring me here. It's all a bit unexpected." Daniel smiled as he poured coffee into their cups. "I understand. It's not a typical offer. But you have no idea how your help affected me. I was at the edge. My whole life had gone off track, and I didn't think I could continue. And then, at the bus stop, you just reached out. And I realized that things could still change. I started to gather strength and opened this cafe. But something's missing, something special. And I thought, you might be exactly what we need. Ryan listened, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and embarrassment welling up in his chest. Daniel continued. I want this place to be more than just a business. I want people to feel at home here. We're creating a space where anyone can find not only great coffee but also a bit of peace, a place to think. Ryan, a little confused but genuinely intrigued, looked around the cafe. He saw that the place was filled with the spirit of hard work and care. He didn't know what to say, but he understood that Daniel didn't just want money or investments. He wanted Ryan to become part of something bigger, part of his dream. This is unusual, but maybe I'll say yes, Ryan said, smiling. Let's talk about the details. In that moment, Ryan didn't know that this step would change his life. The cafe, and his relationship with Daniel, this was only the beginning. But he felt he had made the right choice. The weeks that followed that meeting at the coffee shop flew by for Ryan like one bright, vivid moment. He found himself increasingly immersed in the atmosphere of the new venture, drawing inspiration not just from the work itself, but from his relationship with Daniel. The coffee shop, which he had initially seen as something odd and unusual, was becoming a second home to him. Daniel turned out to be far more passionate and driven than Ryan had expected. He wasn't just a man who had opened a business, he was a true dreamer who had poured his soul into the place. From the very beginning, their collaboration felt like an experiment, where each of them was teaching the other something new. As for Ryan, at first he didn't know what to think of it all. He was a successful actor, and his world had always revolved around films, awards, and sets. Business, coffee shops, investments, those were never part of his life. But at some point, he realized he liked being there. This coffee shop, with its warm atmosphere and the many people coming in for a cozy cup of coffee, became something meaningful to him. Every morning, he would come to the cafe to meet with Daniel and discuss the day's plans. They usually sat at a table in the corner, away from other customers. Daniel often brought up important business topics, and Ryan eagerly joined the conversation. They discussed new ways to attract customers, possible changes to the menu, decor ideas, and the ambitions and dreams they both tied to the project. One morning, when the cafe was still quiet, Daniel proposed a new idea. Ryan, he said, pouring a cup of coffee. I think we need to do something special. Something that will make us stand out from the other places in the city. Not just coffee and food, something more. We could host meetups with interesting people, throw parties, organize events where guests could not only enjoy coffee but also learn something new, hear fascinating speakers. Ryan thought for a moment. The idea sounded a bit ambitious, but he liked that Daniel was willing to go beyond the conventional boundaries of business. He thought that if they did it with heart, they could truly create something unique. I like it, Ryan said. But it'll take time and resources. How do you picture the first event? Daniel smiled and shook his head. I've already thought it through. We could invite local artists, musicians, make it an evening of live music and art. It wouldn't just be a party, it would be a real cultural event that draws attention. Ryan shook his head slightly, but he felt a growing sense of confidence inside. All right, let's try it. But let's be careful. I'm on board, but we need to plan it properly. From that day on, work at the cafe became even more intense. Ryan began negotiating with local artists and musicians to invite them to their first event. From time to time, he spoke with regulars who already loved the cafe and invited them to take part in the upcoming evening. Things were moving along, and more people started coming to the cafe, not just for a cup of coffee, but to become part of a unique experience. Meanwhile, Daniel kept developing his ideas. He suggested organizing barista workshops that would attract not only coffee lovers, but also those interested in learning the art of brewing the perfect drink. To Ryan, it sounded like a crazy idea, but he couldn't ignore the fire in Daniel's eyes whenever he talked about it. Daniel truly believed in this project. Ryan, on the other hand, felt that it was more than just a business, it was a philosophy. Every morning, he and Daniel would sit in that same corner, discussing new plans, noticing how the number of visitors grew, and how their coffee shop was becoming something meaningful to the locals. The whole process was incredibly engaging. But as the project became more successful, Ryan began to understand that being part of something bigger than just acting meant more than he had imagined. One day, after a full day of work, as Ryan was stepping out of the cafe, he saw a man he already knew. It was the very man he had helped a month ago, and who was now his business partner. But this time, when Ryan looked at him, he realized that Daniel wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who truly believed in what he was doing and was willing to do whatever it took to change his life and the lives of others. "You know," Ryan said, pausing for a moment, "I never thought I'd be doing something like this. I always thought my life would be all about films and movie sets. But now, I realize that this place, this coffee shop, it actually matters." Daniel smiled and placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Sometimes you have to try something new to understand what truly matters to you." And in that moment, Ryan realized that his life was truly changing. And that with each step, with every cup of coffee, he was growing more and more attached to this project, to this place, and to Daniel, who had helped him see life from a different perspective. Several months had passed since Ryan and Daniel began developing the cafe together. Everything was going relatively smoothly, interest in the place continued to grow, and the cafe was becoming increasingly popular among locals and tourists alike. In the first few weeks after they teamed up, it seemed like the business was thriving and success was just ahead. But life isn't always a romantic tale of easy victories. The beginning of autumn brought not only rain and colder days, but also a series of challenges that made Ryan and Daniel question how far they could go in this business, and what they would have to endure along the way. The first alarming sign was a drop in customer traffic. After the initial wave of success, the cafe suddenly faced a sharp decrease in visitors. Instead of grateful guests and enthusiastic reviews, Ryan and Daniel began receiving more and more complaints. Some customers said that the coffee in recent weeks didn't taste as good as it used to. Others spoke about poor service and a lack of attention from the staff. These weren't major mistakes, but as one of Ryan's old friends used to say, it's the little things that matter. Ryan was sitting in the cafe's office, going through new income and expense reports, when Daniel walked into the room. He looked worried, his eyes dimmed from exhaustion. "Have you seen the latest reports?" he asked without sitting down. "We're losing customers." "I thought everything was going well," but Daniel trailed off, unsure how to continue. Ryan glanced at the papers, which showed not just a decline in revenue, but also numerous reviews clearly expressing dissatisfaction. "I've seen them. And I've heard it. People are starting to say the coffee tastes worse. They say they don't feel the same quality they used to." "I'm sure it's not our fault." Ryan paused, trying to understand what could have led to such a result. Daniel nervously shuffled the papers on the table, his hands slightly trembling. "Then what is it?" he went on, lifting his gaze. "I can't believe we could lose everything we built over such small things." "These aren't small things, Daniel," Ryan said, getting up and walking over to him. "In business, even the slightest changes can be a serious threat. Remember how we built all this? It's all about atmosphere, about quality. Even a minor slip can damage our reputation." Ryan knew that they were about to face difficulties they hadn't considered before. He had always seen himself as someone who could handle problems, but this was beginning to spiral beyond his control. That evening, Ryan and Daniel spent a long time discussing what might have gone wrong. Perhaps it was an issue with their suppliers, or maybe something internal within the cafe's operations. They went over the small things, changes in deliveries that caused disruptions in coffee production. Maybe they hadn't paid enough attention to new staff? Too many problems with new baristas? That night, when everyone had gone home, Ryan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the issues that were piling up. With each passing day, the situation grew more and more tense. Soon, they discovered they were also facing growing competition, as larger coffee chains began opening locations in the area. Their marketing budgets were significantly bigger, and their advertising far more aggressive. It was dangerous. The next morning, he and Daniel met again to discuss what to do next. "We need to make changes, Ryan," Daniel said, looking him in the eye. We have to do something fast, or we'll lose everything. Ryan felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier with each day. He was ready to look for solutions, and he knew he couldn't afford to give up. But there was a sense that time was slipping away, and they had to act fast. We can do everything we can to win back our old customers and attract new ones, he said. First and foremost, we need to improve the quality. We need to bring back the soul we started with. And we can't just fight our competitors, we need to stand out, become something unique. Daniel thought for a few seconds, then nodded. You're right. But how do we do that? It has to be more than just updating the menu. Ryan fell into thought again. He realized they needed something radically new, something that would draw people back. With that mindset, he pitched an idea. What if we created not just a cafe, but a space for creativity? We could host events where people not only enjoy coffee but also take part in workshops, meet writers, artists, musicians. We could do something at the intersection of cultures, hold poetry nights or art presentations. There's nothing like that in this area. We could become a meeting place for creative people. Daniel looked confused at first, but gradually his eyes lit up. You're right. That's exactly what we need. We won't just be a cafe, we'll be a place where people can connect. We could actually do this. And with this new idea, they began to plan every detail. It would take effort, time, and investment. But they were ready to fight for their dream. After deciding to organize creative events, Ryan and Daniel began actively working on bringing their idea to life. To rekindle interest in the cafe and make it more appealing to people, they organized their first event, an evening of poetry and live music that promised to be not just another gathering, but a true cultural experience. The first week of preparation was filled with work. Despite his experience in the show business world, Ryan was surprised at how much effort it took to organize such events. Together with Daniel, they visited local artists, persuaded them to participate, and hired designers to transform the space. The cafe, which was usually just a place where people enjoyed their coffee, was now turning into an art venue. Daniel took on the responsibility of coordinating the performances and working with the artists. He was in his element, full of enthusiasm, and his eyes lit up as he discussed every detail of the evening. Ryan, despite his busy schedule in the film industry and constant travel, spent nearly all his free time building a promotional strategy. He leveraged his media and social network connections to spread the word about the upcoming event. Soon, mentions began appearing in blogs and on local news websites. When the day of the event arrived, the cafe was filled with an incredible atmosphere. A few hours before it began, the doors were already open, and guests started to arrive, locals, tourists, and even people they never thought would want to step into a small cafe in the center of Milan. There were startup founders, artists, and journalists. The event had become more than just a gathering of coffee lovers, it had turned into an important cultural happening. As soon as the event began, the atmosphere was filled with magic. The first line of a poem was recited, and the room fell into silence. The live music in the background only deepened the mood. Ryan sat in a corner, observing everything. He felt the energy flowing into each visitor, realizing that the ideas he and Daniel had worked on were truly coming to life. Everything was just as he had imagined. The cafe was no longer just a place to grab a coffee. It had become a place for connection, for inspiration. But it wasn't without its challenges. Despite the event's success, many problems remained that they still had to face. The cafe started attracting attention, but along with it came supply issues. Some coffee types used for special recipes became difficult to find. It was also hard to maintain the same high level of service with a growing number of customers. One evening, when things seemed to have finally settled down a bit, Ryan walked into the cafe and saw a concerned look on Daniel's face. "We're spending too much time on logistics," Daniel said, looking at him with uncertainty in his eyes. "We need more people. Otherwise, we won't be able to keep this up." "I understand," Ryan replied, feeling the growing tension. "But we can't just hire a bunch of new staff. We have to hold on to the team we already have. We don't have the resources to train a whole bunch of new people." But if we don't improve this aspect, we'll start getting criticized for poor service, and people will leave, Daniel said, realizing how thin the line was between success and failure. Ryan paused to think. He knew that in business, every moment and every detail mattered. His mind began turning over ways to optimize their processes. He realized they needed to focus not only on attracting customers but also on improving the internal workings of their team. Let's try doing an internal audit. I'll observe how each team member works, and maybe we can retrain them a bit, Ryan suggested. Daniel nodded, though his face showed clear signs of concern. He had always believed in working closely with people, but now it seemed like he was nearing burnout. Over the next few weeks, Ryan held several meetings with the baristas and servers, teaching them new approaches to their work. He brought in communication specialists to improve team interactions. They discussed ways to make the cafe's atmosphere even more welcoming, how to speed up service processes, and how to improve product quality. The cafe continued gaining popularity, and each day Ryan and Daniel felt like their business was getting a second wind. They began introducing new ideas, such as coffee tastings and even coffee-making workshops for customers, which made their cafe even more unique. At some point, major magazines and newspapers started writing about the unusual events happening in their cafe, attracting people they never thought they'd reach. One day, when the cafe was packed and the vibe was at its peak, Ryan and Daniel sat at a table, watching life swirl around them. You know, Ryan said, when we started this, I never imagined the cafe would become such an important part of my life. Me neither, Daniel replied, but something tells me this is just the beginning. And in that moment, despite all the difficulties and all the challenges, they realized that it was their efforts, their work, and their belief in the project that had made the cafe not just a business, but a place that had become important to many people. A year had passed since Ryan and Daniel started their business together. It had been a time full of challenges and joyful victories, and now they looked back at their journey with pride. The growth figures they had presented at recent investor meetings were impressive, and the cafe had become an important part of Milan's cultural life. But behind this success were sleepless nights, constant work, and an unrelenting pursuit of excellence. More and more people were coming to their cafe not just for the drinks, but for the atmosphere they had created, one of creativity, connection, and innovation. The place had become a gathering spot for artists, musicians, writers, entrepreneurs, and anyone who longed to be part of something bigger. Ryan and Daniel had become well known not only among their friends but also within local business and cultural circles. Yet, the success had come at a cost. You know, sometimes I wonder how we could have done all this without your support, Ryan said one evening as they sat in the corner, enjoying a cup of coffee. It was late, but the cafe was still lively. People kept coming and going, some stopping by to chat with them. Daniel smiled and shook his head slightly. I think about that too. But you've done a lot to make this possible. You weren't just an investor, you were the driving force. Your perspective on business and your vision of how we could stand out made us what we are today. Ryan paused for a moment. Over the past year, he had often asked himself whether it was all worth it. There were times when he wanted to drop everything and return to his former life, the life of an actor, free from business worries and endless responsibilities. But when he looked at what he and Daniel had built, when he saw how the business had grown and become part of people's lives, he knew they had made the right choice. We did it, Ryan said with a smile. But what's next? Daniel turned to him, his eyes full of determination and ambition. What's next? He repeated. I think we need to move forward. Expand the business. We have ideas we could bring to other cities. Maybe open a few more cafes, but keep the atmosphere that made us unique. We shouldn't just create a place where people drink coffee, we should start a movement, build a brand that stands for something more than just business. Ryan nodded, realizing Daniel was right. It was the logical next step in their story. By the time of that conversation, they had already begun exploring expansion opportunities, scouting new locations for future cafes. But new challenges lay ahead: competition, financial risks, and the need to find the right people to manage new branches. The next morning, when they met with their team to discuss the cafe's future, the mood was almost festive. Staff members congratulated them on their latest milestone. The business was continuing to grow, and the employees they had hired in the early days were now a vital part of this place's family. But like any entrepreneur, Ryan couldn't help worrying about the future. He knew that success required incredible effort and adaptability. New problems were on the horizon. They would need to hire professional managers, invest in marketing, and be prepared for potential setbacks. At one point, he and Daniel even discussed the possibility of bringing in partners to help with further expansion, though Ryan remained cautious. "Do you think we can move forward and take on a couple more locations?" Ryan asked as they sat together in their cafe again, watching people come and go. "We can. But we need to be very careful about who we work with. We can't lose the balance we've created here in Milan." Ryan had to agree. He understood that they had to tread carefully. Success was fragile, and to maintain it, they would need to protect their originality, never losing the soul of the business, no matter how big the brand grew. And so, when Ryan and Daniel met for a final conversation about the future, Ryan glanced out the window toward the street. He saw people entering the cafe with smiles, old friends reuniting, young artists exchanging ideas. In that moment, he realized they had made the right choice. Not just in terms of business, but in how they chose to live. This wasn't just a commercial project. It was a place where people could find something more than coffee, they could find inspiration and a piece of themselves. "You know, Daniel," Ryan said with a smile, "I think we've got this. We made it, and now the real adventure is just beginning." Daniel looked at him, and in his eyes was the same spark that had been there at their very first meeting. He nodded. "Yes, Ryan. We're just getting started. And we have a whole world of possibilities ahead of us." As they stood to say goodbye to those who had come to celebrate their success, they knew their friendship, like their business, was only beginning its journey. The road ahead would be hard, full of highs and lows, but they had already proven they could face any challenge. And now they were ready for the next step. They might not have known exactly what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, their partnership was strong, and they were ready to reach new heights. This was only the beginning.